you, for me, would pass as a native Spanish speaker?
I went so deep with Spanish to understand how Spanish speakers think, how their brain works.
Pronunciation has a massive psychological element to it.
It was kind of a shock. I thought I knew much more than I actually did.
Right, well, I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the StoryLearning podcast my longtime friend, partner in crime, fellow language enthusiast, Dave Pinto. Dave, what a pleasure to see you, man.
It's always nice to see you, Wally. Thanks for having me here.
So who is Dave? I mean, I know who you are, obviously, but tell everyone a little bit about your background, what you do, your relationship with languages, anything else you think is a good way to kick us off.
Yeah, so I'm Dave. I'm from the U.S. I was born and raised in the U.S., and I eventually, over the years, developed a love for Spanish through a great professor that I had in college. And I ended up coming here to live in Spain, where I started to teach English to Spanish speakers. And over the years, I kind of started to focus more and more on pronunciation, because it was something that a lot of students were asking me for, and I saw a lot of people were having trouble with. So that's kind of a long story short version.
Yeah, well, you're selling yourself short as usual, because that's what you do professionally. But I mean, one of the things that I remember noticing about you when we first met, which must have been like 2016, 15, 16, around that time?
2016, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, something around that time. So I mean, professionally, you're focusing on language teaching. But many language teachers that I've met over the years in different countries never really actually get to grips with language learning themselves, right? They don't necessarily learn the language of the country they're living in. You are not that. You, to my ears anyway, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong about this, but you, for me, would pass as a native Spanish speaker.
So I actually often get comments from people nowadays accusing me of being a Spaniard teaching English pronunciation.
So pretending to be American so that you can teach English, right?
Exactly. And they accuse me that I'm American, basically. It can happen. I think everyone's human. And I trained specifically so that I could pass as a native speaker. Of course, when I'm tired, there are situations where, I'm with friends and I might slip with pronunciation or with something, but I can turn it on if I need to. But I trained a lot to get there. But I think what you mentioned about learning languages as a language teacher, I think is very, very important. And it has really helped me, especially because I went so deep with Spanish to understand how Spanish speakers think, how their brain works. And I think that is, it's a really big strength when you're teaching languages, especially when you speak their language.
Yeah, and
have a deep knowledge of it.
We'll come on to the specifics of how to teach pronunciation later on, because that's obviously what you do professionally now. But it just strikes me that when I think about pronunciation, there's always a temptation to think of pronunciation as a technical thing. And to be sure, you do have to get your physiology. You can't produce certain sounds without having your the correct mouth shape, the tongue in the correct position. All of that stuff. But I've always felt that pronunciation has a massive psychological element to it as well, in terms of identity, in terms of confidence. And I've always felt that in my own languages where I feel like I've got quite good pronunciation, the battle has not really been so much of a technical physiological one, but more one of actually developing confidence. So like high level, when you think about developing this native-like ability to speak Spanish and native-like pronunciation, which for listeners of this podcast is the ultimate. This is kind of dream territory here, right? To be able to pass for a native speaker. And in order to pass for a native speaker, there's multiple facets, right? There's the language itself, there's your body language, there's pronunciation. When you think about pronunciation at a high level, when you say that you've done this deep dive on Spanish, you've really tried to get inside the mind of the Spanish speaker, what is that? What are you talking about here?
As you said, there are so many aspects to it. The sounds that are the articulation, the sounds that are coming out of your mouth, your intonation, it doesn't have to do with pronunciation, but we're talking about body language. That's another thing that comes into it. And also not even sometimes it's not even, I don't know if you'd consider it a language thing, but the sounds that people make, right? Like in English, we have our thinking sound. And if you do that in Spanish, people realize right away that you're not a native Spanish speaker. So just things as simple as that. It all comes down to if, when you want to set out and if you have this goal of trying to embody what a native speaker is, whatever that is for you, whatever group of people you're focused on, it comes down to noticing, really getting skilled at noticing differences in the way that you would normally act and in the people that you're trying to embody. So it could be all of those things that you said. And the more time you spend around these people, the more that you notice and the more that you learn. And that's why learning a language from, if you're not living in a country where the language is spoken, these little things are hard to pick up.
Yeah.
Unless you completely create some type of immersive environment on your own, which is pretty difficult.
It's very, I mean, I noticed that we were just chatting before we hit record that I was in Japan recently. And one of the things you always notice going to somewhere like Japan is just how important something like body language is. I mean, and funnily enough, I stopped by South Korea on the way back and met a friend there who's quite a popular Korean YouTuber or American YouTuber who does interviews in Korea. And I'm watching his body language and the way that when you walk up to someone in the street, the way that you position yourself, your demeanor, when you this will give you away instantly, and it's impossible to pick up online. Like there's no way you could learn all of that stuff unless you are actually in the environment. So I do think there's a lot to that. But I want to drill down on it because this is all often the case with language learning. It is it is the truth. It is true to say that to pass as a native speaker, we need to be able to take all of these things into account, right? From body language to intonation to grammar to vocabulary or pronunciation, all of these things. We can know that to be true, but that doesn't necessarily help someone who wants to do it themselves because it's not specific enough. So I want to just see if we can drill down into what the life of Dave would have looked like when he first moved to Spain and said to himself, you know what, I'm going to learn to pass for a native Spanish speaker. What are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis in concrete terms? I mean, is it just as simple as creating an immersion environment for yourself where you can't help but pick these things up? Or are you going through certain routines? Do you have certain things that you try to do every day? Put a bit of meat on the bone there for us.
Yeah, I'd say it's both. So when it comes to more specific activities that I would do to really train this type of thing, I really focused on pronunciation. And I would, on a regular basis, when I was really focused on it, read the first chapter of a book out loud, record myself, and I would often have an audiobook or recording of a native speaker to listen to compare my recording to. So I would first listen. Very
forensic.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Because I think curiosity it's something that's hard to give to somebody. If you don't have the curiosity and curiosity drove a lot of my learning. And so being curious to see what I could find and, when it came to vocabulary, pronunciation, whatever it was. But so I would do that, listen back and compare and try to notice where I was having trouble making transitions from sound to sound, and where I was sounding different from the native speaker, and I would focus on those things. So that's an activity I would do on a very regular basis, and it all kind of tied into this language learning routine that I would have to get as much exposure to the language as possible. So I would do that for the first paragraph of a chapter, for example, but then I would finish the chapter reading, and then I would have a checklist of other things that I have to do on a daily basis, not all related to pronunciation, but to the language. And then also a trap that a lot of people get into when they move to another country is that they find other people that have similar interests to them, but they tend to fall into the feared expat bubble, where they find people that are similar to them who are expats, and the friction of there's not as much friction in the communication because you speak the same language. and they fall into that habit.
By the way, if you're enjoying this interview, then you will love the free guide that I have put together with all of the best language tips from today's guest. We put all of the insights from the interview into a handy one-page PDF that you can refer to whenever you want. To grab it for free, you can scan the QR code on the screen if you're watching on video, or else click the link in the description. It's such an interesting thing, because really what you're talking about here in the experience of someone moving to live abroad is you're almost accepting short-term pain in order to get the long-term gain, aren't you? Because it's always so much more comfortable and convenient to find expat friends who you can hang out with, have friends straight away, enjoy shared activities and things like that. But you know that that's going to come at a big cost. And you do kind of find yourself in a hole that's almost impossible to dig yourself out of eventually. But when you first move somewhere and you're not particularly good at the language, it is very difficult to make local friends because you just don't have that language level yet. And I've been in situations abroad before where I felt quite lonely because I've been quite stubbornly insistent on not putting myself in that expat bubble. And it's difficult. Sometimes you find yourself feeling lonely. And so these very human needs that you have to be around other people and just to feel happy, it's very difficult to keep language learning as the focus of your attention, the focus of your energy for long enough to be successful with it. So when you first moved to Spain, take us through the chronology actually, because you did Spanish at university, right?
Yeah.
And then you moved abroad. How was the level of your, talk us through the level of your Spanish from university to the point where you actually moved to Spain and started living there?
I studied abroad first before moving to Spain. Back in 2013, this was my junior year of college, and I studied at Salamanca. And at that point, I would say maybe between a B1 and a B2 level. I prepared a lot for that trip, and I would say a little better off than other students in the program that I was in. But it was kind of a shock I thought I knew much more than I actually did. And it was a really good experience for me to have that realization and then go back, finish my degree at college and really focus on improving. So then, because I had that experience already abroad, I had a lot of motivation to learn, and I came here with a pretty good level. I was conversational. I had a lot of vocabulary, probably around a B2, C1 level when I got here to live.
So you were able to start living your life to a certain extent from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's because I put the time in before coming here. I knew that it was going to be difficult, and it would be more difficult without having gotten to a conversational level to actually live in a place. Right. So the summer before moving here, I was studying every single day for hours.
So the story you've told then is one that it's relatively common among people who study languages at university, devote themselves to one language in particular, then go and move to that country. I see this from time to time in people who are learning Chinese or Japanese. They develop a really passion or enthusiasm for Chinese or Japanese. They study at university, they do a study abroad trip, they then move to Japan or move to China. And of course, learning the language is difficult. Learning any language is difficult. But it always seems to me that one of the major factors in being able to learn any language to that level is at that point in your life, you've got the time and space to actually focus on the language and spend, thousands and thousands of hours actually doing it. So I'm always quite interested in how we take the experiences we have when we're younger and how well we're able to replicate that as an adult. Because as teachers, what we find is most of our students, I imagine it's the same for you, most of our students are actually adults. They don't have they don't have 10 hours a day to focus on learning a language. And so we're kind of forced to say, in a way, okay, well, I did this when I was learning and devoted my entire life to it for 10 years. But now I'm telling you to do this because that's what you can best do in your reality. And I always find myself torn with that tension, figuring out how to help people navigate it. So let's broaden this out from your experience learning Spanish to other languages. So your partner is Portuguese, or Brazilian rather, and you speak Portuguese with her. How do you think about your level of Portuguese compared to your Spanish? And maybe you could tell us why you describe it the way you do.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of rewind a little bit, Portuguese has always been an important language to me, not only because my girlfriend is Brazilian. My father was he was born in Portugal, and he never taught me Portuguese, but I always had the sound of Portuguese. You know, I heard it from my grandparents. I never understood what they were saying, but the sound of it, I have a connection with it, right? So it was always something that I was interested in. When it comes to my level in Portuguese, I learned Portuguese after Spanish. And since they're pretty similar, they're similar, but that makes it difficult at some level as well, because you start to guess words and grammatical structures. But I would say my Portuguese it's not where my Spanish is. I didn't go down the same path as I did with Spanish. And although I speak Portuguese at home with my girlfriend, we have a language schedule that we follow. I would say that I have a good conversational level in Portuguese, but it's not the level that my Spanish is, because I'm not living in a Portuguese environment outside of the house. And I don't have that same passion to get to a higher level, I guess.
This is the interesting thing, because I mean, I guess I also want to say that the level is also not, I don't consider it to be important at all.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when, for those of us here, our goal is to improve our level. And then it's always interesting to think about what one might do in order to improve their level, right? So, for many people, it might seem counterintuitive that your girlfriend is Brazilian. You have the opportunity to speak Portuguese at home every day in that kind of intimate environment. And yet it's not where your Spanish is, which in itself is interesting. I guess you said it yourself, right? You said something like you don't have the same motivational drive or need to learn Portuguese as with Spanish. Do you think then that when we have this real insatiable drive to learn a language, often our first language, is it something that you think really for most of us can only happen once at one point in our life? And it's difficult to replicate even in an environment like you have, where you have the ability to speak with a native speaker at home. Why do you think you don't have that same drive to get your Portuguese to be as good as it could possibly be?
It's an interesting question, right? I think it's like Spanish was my first love when it came to languages. And I just wanted to learn everything I could possibly, move to a Spanish speaking country. And it was also not only just the language, it was also Spain and Spanish culture. And when it comes to Portuguese, I obviously love the language, but it's not the same. And maybe it's because of the situation where I'm living. Although I can use it on a day-to-day basis, I don't need to go really deep. So because that kind of first love difference of it, and also there's no need to. If I were to move to Brazil or to Portugal, maybe that would change. But I think it depends on your situation, really. Everyone's different.
There's also like
a
big identity component to this, because when we are 16, 18, 20, like, we're still forming our identity, right? And certainly for me, when I first fell in love with languages, such a big part of that for me was that I felt like I wanted my identity to have these languages as part of them, right? I had a certain amount of dissatisfaction with my identity being like a monolingual English guy. Like that wasn't enough for me. And so a big part of learning my first language, which was French, was in service of forming a new identity of sorts, because there was something inside me that just wasn't satisfied with the identity that I had. But I guess the older we get, the more confident we are in our identities. And even in a romantic relationship, there's a big part of it that the reason that the relationship works is because you are you, right? It's not necessarily a good thing or desirable thing for you to start to then change your identity afterwards and become a new person. I wonder if it is just like how much of this is down to us forming this new identity, or the identity of the person that we want to become. And you also said that you have no need to. And the thing about that statement, I have no need to become better at this language, is that doesn't this represent the situation of most adults learning a new language? in adulthood. There is really usually no need to actually do it. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, do you think that's the case? And then secondly, what does that mean if there is not that real need to learn the other language?
So I think there's no need for me to get to the level that I am in Spanish in Portuguese, but there's always, I have to speak to my girlfriend's family, and whenever we go to Brazil, I want to be able to communicate fluently with as little friction as possible. So there's always room for improvement, but there's just, for me, there's no need to get to that level. But you're right that if you've achieved the goal that you had in a language, there's no need to push past that. You can want to, but if you're learning because, in my case, Portuguese, I want to communicate with my girlfriend's family and, have a relationship with them. If I can do that, I don't really have a reason to go any further.
Let's broaden this out further to your students and what you do and what you help people with. So you are focusing on helping predominantly Spanish speakers with their English and specifically teaching American English pronunciation. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I teach American English pronunciation to Spanish speakers. Most of my students are from Spain.
So in terms of how this relates to people listening to this podcast, because you're very familiar with the language learning world in general, do you feel that the challenges that your Spanish students have learning American pronunciation are broadly the same kind of challenges as a native English speaker learning Spanish? Is there a material difference there, or is it the same set of difficulties?
Yeah, they're the same types of difficulties, just, if one language to the next will change. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. So whether it be the sounds that we have trouble with or intonation, things like that, connected speech.
So if you were to characterize the main challenges that your students have with American English, what would they be? And what have you found to be most effective in helping them?
So when it comes to pronunciation, the biggest thing that I see is the lack of time spent listening to the language and in contact with the language. The ear should come before the mouth. You need to be able to identify a sound, be able to distinguish it from other similar sounds in the language that you're learning, and also your native language. And then from there, once you have a good ear for it, then you can move on to producing the sound. Some students are able to imitate very well. Others need some practice with articulation. But I would say the main thing that I see is lack of time listening to the language and not enough focus on working on the ear, listening.
So does this mean practically that when someone comes to you, presumably expecting you to help them, I don't know, make the form the American R or something like that, you actually do what they don't expect and say, look, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to actually go back and spend a lot of time listening. Is that what happens in practice?
Yes. I mean, most of the time, let's say with the R, maybe it's a sound that's very, very different from Spanish. So that one in particular, they might have an easier time hearing, and we don't have to spend as much time with that. But definitely listening is the first focus when we work on improving pronunciation.
Listening is a broad word, isn't it? What does that mean in practice? Is it enough to spend a couple of hours watching Netflix every evening? Or are we talking about more focused listening on specific, focused guided intensive listening?
If the person is not listening to any English on a daily basis, which does happen, watching Netflix or listening to something that they can understand in a kind of more extensive way will always be a good idea. But when it comes to improving these sounds, pronunciation, we need to do more focused listening, going from shorter audios of individual sounds in words in different positions, sentences, and working our way up from there.
Okay, so you're actually talking about quite specific, not extensive listening then, really, like actually quite focused activities.
Yes, because, if we talk about vowels, for example, you speak Spanish, their vowel system is very limited, right? So I would say vowels, it's probably one of the most common problems that Spanish speakers have in English. And being able to hear them and create those categories in their brain, because they have those 5 boxes that their brain wants to put our English vowels into. And we need to create new categories for them so that they can say, oh, okay, this is different from the Spanish sound, and then from there work on, producing the sound and incorporating it to speech.
I'm curious in general in Spain these days. You said students who come to you, what kind of interaction with English would they typically have on a weekly basis? Where are they listening to English? Is it the tourists on the street? Is it the occasional YouTube video? Is it at work? How much do they actually interact with the language?
Yeah, it varies a lot from student to student. A lot of my students are, work in an English speaking environment, so they'll use it in a professional context. Some of them are more interested and they might do all of their YouTube watching in English and, read articles in English, and others might not. They might do everything in Spanish outside of work and only use English inside of work.
I'm curious if you were to have you ever helped English speakers with their Spanish pronunciation?
Yes, I do some tutoring for English speakers learning Spanish. We actually created a course together for English speakers learning Spanish pronunciation.
Yes, we did, which obviously I'm aware of. I guess I was wondering if you did it more systematically as on a kind of one-to-one level or on intuition with English speakers. So what I was getting at was whether you would, and I assume the answer is yes. For someone listening to this who is an English speaker wanting to perfect their Spanish pronunciation, is it a similar kind of hierarchy of work here? Is it like step one, are you listening to any Spanish at all? And if not, then just do yourself a favor and put on some Netflix in the evening in Spanish. And then step two, if you actually are surrounded by the language, then start to work on this intensive listening before actually trying to work deliberately on your Spanish pronunciation. Would you expect to take people through that same process?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Because we learn sound in the same way, right? How to imitate these. And everybody, some people are more, I don't know, because of maybe their profession. I've worked with actors before that they're able to catch the sounds and hear the sounds much more quickly than maybe somebody who doesn't work in a field where they need to be paying attention to detail, the difference in sound, intonation. But starting with listening is definitely the first step in any case.
Yeah.
Making sure that they can hear the difference and identify.
For anyone listening who's learning Spanish, I really recommend you check out Dave's social media, because you have, what I've seen from you is on TikTok and Instagram. Is that mostly what you're focused on?
Yeah, TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've been creating really amazing content for a few years now. How would you describe the content that you create on social?
Well, it actually started off a little bit more kind of general, teaching English to Spanish speakers, but doing skits of typical mistakes, translation mistakes. I would play different characters. And over the years, I started to get a little bit more focused onto pronunciation, but and now I do mostly pronunciation videos, but I was doing skits for a while that were fun to do, to be honest.
Yeah, it was super fun to watch. And some of them went mega viral as well. I mean, you had some with millions of views, didn't you? And I found it very interesting as a Spanish learner myself to watch this content. Your content's obviously intended for Spanish speakers, but you're teaching English. It is actually quite useful for English learners who are learning Spanish as well, because sometimes when you see how the speakers of your target language relate to your own language and how they think about it, that actually tells you a lot about how you can think about that language as well. I'm not sure if I've explained that very well.
No, definitely. Because, I mean, if in the US this is the case. I mean, a lot of people have maybe day-to-day interactions with Spanish speakers in English, and you might not notice that maybe a mistake that they're making in English or some type of, pronunciation characteristic that they have is actually directly from Spanish, and you can learn from that. And so those videos were showing these typical mistakes and why they're making these mistakes. So definitely for an English speaker, it'd be interesting to see those differences.
Yeah, and we'll put some links to your handles on social are El Profe Guiri. Do you want to explain what that means for those who might not be familiar with Castilian Spanish?
Yeah. So in Spain, the concept of giri is a foreigner, basically. So I'm the foreign teacher. Usually it's an English speaking foreigner, but it's just a foreigner in general.
But I'm curious because I have my own thoughts on this, but how do you think of the connotation of the word giri in Spanish? Is it completely neutral? Is it slightly negative? Is it affectionate? How do you read it? Or does it depend who's using it?
It really depends. And it's actually interesting over the years that I've been using this name. Sometimes I talk to students about this and it depends on the student. A lot of them have different ideas of what giri is, and it can be used in a negative way, definitely. And some students just kind of think of it as more neutral, but yeah, so it depends on the tone. I think that's the most important thing.
The intention behind it. Yeah. It's a lot like, I mean, a lot of languages and countries have these words. I mean, gaijin is the Japanese equivalent, which is often used. It can be fairly pejorative, but also it can be said in a nice way as well. And I guess it's exactly the same here. We will link to your channels in the show notes. I really encourage everyone just to go and watch a few of your videos because they're super entertaining. We'll also put a link to the Spanish pronunciation course that you helped us make here at StoryLearning. If anyone here is learning Spanish and would like to improve their Spanish pronunciation with Dave, with El Profe Giri, you can do that. We'll put a link to that as well in the show notes. Dave, any other places that people can find you if they want to learn more about you?
Just El Profe Giri on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I'll be starting to make longer form content soon, so that's where you can find me.
Okay, man. Thanks so much. It's been really great to catch up.
As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
And don't forget to download your free guide with all of the language tips from today's guest. You can scan the QR code on the screen if you're watching on video, or else click the link in the description.